So it's now
There
8
you go.
o'clock. And so Rabbi asked me to record the session, so I'm going to do that. He is not here today. He is overseas traveling. And Afia has kindly offered to take our session today. So Afia, I'm going to
Thank you.
hand the keys off to you. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Everyone, welcome.
Morning.
I'm assuming then that there isn't an intro video. It's okay if there's not, but I didn't want to
There's
hop in.
not. There is not.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there usually? I don't remember.
Sometimes there is.
No,
This morning there is not.
there's not usually, but and when Rabbi asked me to hold today's time, he asked if that would be helpful, and I said, oh, sure. And then he said he would make one, but I didn't want to skip it if there was one available. So hi everyone.
If
Hi.
there was one, he did not tell me about it.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, so we can do a quick hello to the folks who are watching on YouTube and Facebook. I think everyone can see you. Hi, folks. Also, I don't know if you all hop into those channels much, but just want to encourage, especially from the conversation today, that those might be some places to drop some chats and some ideas in the comment section. So just remember that that's a possibility for continued dialogue outside of our time together. So I'm going to start with the truth. Well, I'll finish with the truth too. I've never been here to get but I'm recently back from a spiritual pilgrimage. Some of my other work that I hold involves bringing folks together in interfaith dialogue and then taking them on spiritual pilgrimage to Ghana to go back through the door of no return and sort of start this ritual process of repairing the African diaspora by undoing the ritual, dismissal and exile from the continent. It's available to all folks who understand themselves to be humans because fundamentally we are all one people, even though we know ourselves in these different ways. But that's just to say that if you're interested in that work, I'm happy to talk more about it. It's really central to my heart. And in my own life, I've not shared this with you all, but I'm actually in training to be a priest in the traditional Ghanaian religion called Akom. And so I've been in my own diasporic experience of the Ghanaian culture here in the US, which is actually a great blessing. And so this was my first time being in the flesh in Ghana. I feel like I've dreamt of it. I've read books of it. I've talked with elders. I've been on WhatsApp videos of people who are in the village. So I've been there in some way, but this was my first time being there with my body. And I was there with this group of people kind of shepherding this larger project, helping folks who identify themselves as Afro-Latinx connect with the continent in a really intentional way. So that's all to say that I was there for a month and I've just been in Atlanta where I call home now for like 4 days. And so I feel a lot like that. I just for the first time cooked a meal for myself yesterday because I've just been eating fruit and sandwiches because I just couldn't manage to do much else. So that's all to say. I agreed to hold today before the pilgrimage, like maybe 2 months ago. I was like, oh yeah, but it'll be such a rich experience. It'll be easy to come up with something to talk about and share. And then now I'm super overwhelmed with just adjusting and experiencing some culture shock. So I have one thing on my mind that I hope is some fruitful food for thought for us. So while I was there, I was thinking a lot about home and belonging. I'm an Army brat, and there's always like an intro round of questions where people ask where you're from. And just in March, I was asked that question, well, where do people feel like they're most at home? And I didn't have an answer. And that was fine. Like, I feel like I'm at home where my family is. So if we're on the cruise ship, I feel good. If we're in Maryland where they live, I feel good. But I never felt a place-based sense of home. And surprisingly, on this pilgrimage to Ghana, I felt that for the first time. So there's also some grief in being back of like, oh, I didn't expect to feel like I belonged at a place I'd never been. I know that we have lineage from there, but I've heard you all talk about like ancestry tests and things. So everyone is having their own relationship to what it means to belong here like somewhat removed from. So yeah, I'm bringing a set of those questions to us today. And oh, sorry, I can't see the chat, but I feel like I want to see it. Okay, rules. Sorry, I wanted to see if there was something there I should pull into the combo. So I didn't start thinking about diaspora. That's the word that's on my mind, really until I was in seminary. And I realized that I talk about this class with you all almost anytime Rabbi lets me share something. It's about this
Yeah,
one.
that would be awesome.
Yeah, it changed everything for me. But the class was in diaspora theory, which is really just the study of people who are in exile from a homeland. And so it can be defined, or it can be very specifically defined. And we were exploring this theory relative to the New Testament and trying to understand how a canon of books came to exist and why. Like, what was the sociological function of saying these are the only texts that we will use to know ourselves relative to our God. And one of the ways that the course challenged us was to read the New Testament books that we all know in the Bible alongside the Nag Hammadi group of texts, which I think I've shared with you all was my sort of nerd specialty. And what our main task in the semester was to figure out what our personal canon was after having read both the books and these new books that we've never and these new books that we have never heard or read before. And along the way are considering how canon reveals a lot about identity, right? So if I say, for example, the best way to think about it is like, what's the canon of spices in your kitchen? And what does it say about your identity? Or the canon of spices and culture's cuisine, right? Like whether cumin and turmeric and hot pepper over here, maybe over there, it's garlic, onion, and salt. And these things help connect us to people, to land, to stories, to proverbs, all sorts of things. And so these books that we use in our religious practices or just life philosophies, however you want to call it, they help to tell us something about how we know ourselves and our people. So this is my one little bit of homework for those who, oh, no worries. Hi, Puppy. Puppy is welcome as well. A little bit of homework. If you haven't done that work for yourself, it's actually a really interesting exercise to think about what are the texts, what are the poems, the songs, the wisdom sayings that make up the canon of your life. As I was thinking about this, that it would be really powerful to come up with a religion outside the box canon. And so this is why I was thinking of like the YouTube comment section or the Facebook section of like, given what we know about ourselves in this community on this Saturday, I was informed of the ROTB, like serving 0.000% of the world's population. Yeah. So like, given that on this global scale, we are still serving a people, what are the reference points that help us know ourselves, what's important to us? So if you have those ideas of songs or whatever it is, I think it'd be fun to know them. And then also for you to do that work in your own life. If you could pick 8 books, eight textual sonic things, like what are the things that say who you are, what's important to you, and what's important to your relationship with this force that we're all trying to figure out how to relate to in the right way. So that's the nerd portion of the diaspora theory and what was on my mind. More generally, I have this question because this course and then this pilgrimage experience to Ghana really moved me because I realized that my own relationship to the question of where you consider home was also saying something about the people who are asking it, that they understand themselves to belong very solidly to a place. And I'm curious about the other side of the coin, not for the sake of grief or trauma, but this class in particular asked us the question, what's your own experience of diaspora? And so whether we knew ourselves to be part of a diaspora or not, we were really pressed to think about how are we holding some sense of homeland? How are we separate from a group? How are we in the process of coming back to a native place? And so maybe you're estranged from your family, or maybe you're an artist and your community's fallen apart and you don't know where you get to express yourself as an artist anymore. But these experiences of breaking off from the collective, from a place of homeness, feels like a universal experience. And it becomes more universal as we can identify it in a particular, right? So what broke open for me in this class was feeling like I'm in diaspora from people in America. My mother was raised white, my father was raised Black. And so my experience of diaspora is from both sides, where I'm clearly not a white person. I've never been confused about that. And then to many, not many, to some, when I was younger, it seemed like many, because your world is, as a kid, your world is as big as the people that you know. So it seemed like between family and folks at school who were African-American, that I wasn't African-American as soon as they learned I had a white mother. And so I can be a part of a group as long as I'm the safe Black person to white folks. And I can be a part of the group of Black folks until they learn that I have a mother who isn't Black as well. And so that cracked me open. And in my particular experience of diaspora as a Black mixed race woman, I was sharing it as a part of my thesis presentation, and it generated so much conversation. It was really compelling to experience. And so in my scattered culture shock self moment right now, that's the other question that I have for us is, if there are, what are they, your own experiences of diaspora, and how do they tell you about what's important to you about belonging? Because the underbelly of that question, as difficult as it can be to process what it means to be in exile, the heart of the question is that you belong somewhere. And until we're clear about where it is that we belong and what we need to get back there, I'm convinced, I think this is part of why this class made such an impact on me. I'm convinced that until we all have that sense for ourselves, we can easily make decisions that continue to cut other people off from their own sense of belonging and homeland, right? Because suddenly what's important to me is more important than what's important to you. But then we have these wisdom sayings of like, we're all trying to walk each other home, right? So we're all in exile, we all know we belong. And so what's this ebb and flow between the things? So that was like a 10-minute diatribe. So I'm gonna stop and take a breath and see what's up.
Thanks for bringing that, because I'm in that in that walk as well. And I mean, about well, my story is I'm an adopted child. My real name is not, I mean, not, it's my real name. It's my legal name is Enrique Ramos because of my adoptive family, but my biological name is Samuel Bruno. And that's where my story begins. Bruno is not a usual surname in Puerto Rico. So I was either Italian or something else. Now, then I discovered that Bruno was also a surname that the Jewish people in Italy adopted. There's even a small town, Serrastreta, which was started by three families, and one of them is Bruno. And I said, aha. So I took a DNA test, and well, I'm 2% Jewish, and I always felt Jewish, always. I mean, I cannot explain it, but there was something that drew me to being Jewish. So I got in contact with Rabbi Ryan, and I joined the group, and I call this my tribe. adopted Judaism uh, as part of my me. That's how I see it. That's me. That's who I am. Um, Also, people in Puerto Rico would look at me and say, "You don't look Puerto Rican. Are you from the United States or something?" Why? Because you're blue-eyed, you have fair skin. And I said, "Well, yo no sé. I don't know." It's like, but anyways, um, then I started looking at Sephardic Jews because those were the ones who came here from with Columbus. Uh, Interestingly, the biggest ship, the Santa Maria, was filled with Jewish people. The biggest ship, and Christopher Columbus was supposedly was also a Jewish convert. But there were not only three ships, but there were more, and they brought more Jewish people. An interesting thing that happened to me as well was that while I was working on my master's in social work, I found this guy from Palestine, and he said, "You Puerto Ricans don't look you don't look like other Hispanics. You look more than me." And then we were at a bus station, and when people were coming out from the bus, he would point at people. He looks like me. He looks like a girl from Palestine as well. And I discovered that uh, there is what is called now the fourth race in Puerto Rico, and it's people from uh, um, the Jewish people as well. So I said, okay, let's look at the people in what bad they will call marranos, the Jewish converts from Spain, or simply Jewish people who had come from Spain. And I was so happy about it. And I was, oh, I'm going to learn Ladino and da 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 da. And then after I took my DNA test, I got a surprise. I I am Jewish, but not Sephardic.
So, but truly, there. I don't mean to cut you off, but there's so much in what you're saying about different ways of knowing ourselves, right? Like you had an inner knowing. There's an external affirmation of what you look like, what other Puerto Ricans look like. So there's all these levels to negotiate,
Right.
and I think to me it resonates with some of the conversations that we have in this space a lot because Rabbi Brian's always like, "You want to be Jewish? Like Shazam, you're Jewish, right?" Like there's a way there's a way
Yeah,
of like accepting like
that's what
this
he did with me. But I said, no, I want the whole thing. I want to go through a Beit Din, and Alex was there, and there was another rabbi, and all that, and after that, Carol Ox also said, "Welcome," and I see in Carol the Jewish aunt that I never had. So, anyways, yeah, that was the thing. And then I said, well, how this works, and in probably was that they were Ashkenazi Jewish people who traveled to Spain and married there, and that's where the Jewish Spaniards or whatever came to Puerto Rico. But yeah, it's has been interesting going through my biological family tree and looking about it, and has been a wonderful experience. And this is where I belong. So
yeah, welcome. Thank you for sharing, Shuli. Yeah.
toda
Um, yeah, I don't know what else is in the air for folks. There's a little bit of a lot on this Saturday.
I think the idea of being in the diaspora is something that I've kind of felt my whole life. I felt like I never really belonged anywhere, and to some extent, since I've moved to Atascadero, I sort of feel displaced because I, grew up and lived most of my life in and around the Lompoc, California Valley. And now I live in Atascadero, which is, an hour. It's not terribly far away. It's an hour and 20 minutes by car, but it's still on the Central Coast, and the culture is the same, but it's not Lompoc, right? And, there's parts to me that I'm really glad that I left, because Lompoc has been struggling for many years with problems like crime and homelessness. And unfortunately, Lompoc seems to be particularly poor at managing the gang problems and the crime problems. And so leaving was a safety issue for me, as well as just, having an opportunity to be somewhere else. But there's also this aspect of disconnectedness too, because I spent so much of my life there that when I drive back to town to transact some business that I still have there, it feels very odd, because it's like it's my hometown, but it's not home anymore.
Yeah, and that question there, there's two things in there, Alex. One is like, what happens when you're sort of forced out of your home, right? Or like, especially in that area of like, oh, well, you could have stayed and seen, like, to see how it goes, but no, because you don't feel safe, so you have to leave, right? So there's like this weird tension between a forced displacement and a chosen. Like sometimes we choose to go away, and then we can't, right? Because what was once home is gone.
Right. And the thing that I found too is that, you can't really go home again once you leave it. It's, you can't really go home.
It's true.
Right.
Because wait, but say more. Why not? What
well,
changes?
okay. It's when you live in a place for a long time, and then you leave the place for however long it is that you've left, right? When you go back, the place has changed, right? And I noticed that, like when I went away to college, even, and the Lompoc that I left when I went away to college, and the Lompoc that I returned to, 4.5 years later, it was not the same community exactly. There were a lot of things that were similar, but it's, but not only did the town change, I changed, right? And so, things that, I thought were, that's just the way the world works, right? You leave and then you come back and you realize, well, just because they do it that way here doesn't mean they do it, somewhere else. And, and some places do it better. For, what, like one stupid and silly trivial example, but it's very telling, is Lompoc used to do this. Well, they still do a cruise where everybody brings their fancy cars and parades up and down the main drag. And Atascadero does the same thing, only Atascadero does it way better. And so then you go back and you look at what you used to do, and you go, well, that wasn't as good. But there's aspects for me too that, the being forced out, that was something that had been kind of building over 10 years, and I kept writing to our city leaders and contacting city leaders and talking to the city councilor and saying, hey, this crime problem is a really, it's getting bad. There's, and I even gave them suggestions like, okay, here's what we need to do about problem X or problem Y. And I felt like my ideas, which weren't going to cost a lot of money, were just completely, ignored. And the problem just kept building and building and building. And finally it got to the point where, the year before I left, there were 52 shootings in a town of 44,000 people. So we were having at least one shooting a week, and some of them were near my house. And that was at the point where I said, I got to get out of here. And so I feel forced out as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Aaron,
I sort of had an experience where I didn't choose. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and my father was a modern Orthodox, and my mom wasn't really religious, so I didn't really have a strong religious identity, although I have a very cultural Jewish Ashkenazi identity. And I just sort of, I went to synagogue until I was 13, and I was told after my bar mitzvah, I didn't have to go back, and I didn't want to go back. So I didn't develop that way. So I've always considered myself culturally Jewish, but not religiously Jewish, which was hard to really explain unless you have a Jewish background. So I just ended up. I live in like near Columbus, Ohio now, and I try to form community locally, but it's difficult for me because I have a very, I don't know, introverted personality. It's hard for me to have social kind of anxiety. So, and that it wasn't really a choice; it just sort of happened. I went to college and I graduated, and just things didn't work out really work wise. So I am where I am, and I feel very Ashkenazi Jewish, and I understand the religious people, but I don't. And religious is that's complicated. I just don't believe in the standard ideas of what's considered Western religion. I don't really believe in one thing or another, but I don't not believe. I'm not an atheist in that sense. That I just think it's bullshit. I don't. I think it's cultural more than anything for me. So it's more of a. It's not like I was thrown out or anything. I chose because I didn't really know any better or worse, and I don't really have regrets. But it's just I've sort of ended up. I'm 51 years old, and I was an only child, and my parents were both. Well, my father was an only child. My mother had a twin, but they all died before. So it's just like I have a family of my own, and that's complicated as well. So it's just like I don't know. It's sort of I'm very kind of agnostic about culture, and I'm considered. You look at me, I'm white, right? But I don't consider myself white.
But Aaron, you bring up
I know I present white, and I take advantages of its I don't know, benefits, you want to call that. I take advantage of being white, and not so much as yay, look at me, I'm white. But I don't try to look Jewish. When I walk somewhere, no one knows I'm Jewish, so I'm white, and that's just by default.
I just want to point out one thing in what you're saying, Aaron, which is that this is one of the ways that there's a silver lining to all of the things we experience. That while sociologists talk about that phenomenon where two individuals from different groups can have more in common with each other than they could have in common with other people from their same in-groups, right? So I'm noticing, even in just a few experiences that have been shared, that despite our individual and particular experiences of diaspora, here we find ourselves in some place collectively belonging, right, on this little screen. So it, as complex and intricate and maybe grief-ridden and all of the things as diaspora can be, there's still this perk of being in a cosmopolitan situation where we can find likeness with other people who are not like us at all, despite not feeling belonging or similarity inside of one in-group that we know ourselves to be part of. So thank you for sharing, Aaron. Rita, I think, and then Carol.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, right across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. Cincinnati was the home of Reform Judaism. There was a lot going on there. My hometown, nobody else was Jewish. And I never cared about that. I just knew I was Jewish. I wasn't a religious Jew. My parents took off work on Jewish holidays, but they didn't go to temple or anything like that. And I never felt like I belonged there. I was always different, but I never felt persecuted. People, like when I was in the 7th grade, my homeroom teacher asked me to speak to her church ladies group about Hanukkah. And I gave a nice little talk, but I mixed it up with Passover. So they now think that they have a whole different
translation.
I mean, and they didn't care, and I didn't care. But I always wanted to come to California, and I never knew why. And so I moved to San Francisco, and I still was not in a Jewish community. just always knew I was Jewish, and I never really felt like I was getting even any information about that until I found religion outside the box, because I am outside everybody's box. What I found is my home was Boulder Creek, the Redwoods, and theater. And I have felt like I have a home, and in it I am Jewish, especially in this group, because I really like learning about Judaism. And I realized I was always in diaspora. And it was okay because I met all kinds of nice people anyway. It's not a normal story, I guess. But anyway, I'm glad I've met all of you, and I've learned things about being Jewish that I never knew before. And I think
So
that's
did
a
my
good.
dad.
Oh,
My father moved to Hollywood when he was old because he'd spent time in California when he was younger, and so he moved back before he died, which was interesting. You have that in common. Probably
well,
nothing else.
California is sort of, at least parts of it, the parts I found, in my opinion, they're sort of floating above this planet in a way, certainly above the rest of the United States in a way. And I float well with it. It's a place where you can be different, and everybody else is different too, so it really doesn't matter. I don't know. I love meeting people from all over, especially a lot of Canadians, because I never really knew many Canadians before, and I just really admire Canada as also a place, I think, that where you can float and be what you are, even if it's like nothing else. And maybe that's what diaspora is also. A lot of people that didn't fit in.
Yeah, there's so many different kinds of diaspora. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm a big Rush fan, and Geddy Lee, Jewish and not Jew.
Aaron, Aaron, I'm gonna let Carol go next because she had her hand raised when you were. No, you're fine. No worries. I'm just, because you spoke with your hand raised as well, I'm gonna just let her sneak in real quick.
I just finished reading a wonderful book about solitude, and what it said really is that solitude is not loneliness. You find that you carry within you what makes you you and what makes you home.
Yeah.
And I have found that my husband died a year ago, and I'm still living in the same place, and I'm still feeling completely comfortable being here because I am carrying him and my relationship to God with me. And so I don't think I will be lonely, because I think home is your relationship to God.
Yeah. Amen. So where were you reading that? Would you say it was a book?
Yeah, I will show you the title. It's wonderful.
Yes, please. More resources for our diasporic corner of religion outside the box. And then after Carol shows her book, Maria, are you the one who's holding our thoughts and prayers for folks? Okay, we'll do that after we hear. At the center of all beauty. Carol, can you move it back just a little bit so we can see? Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. Fenton Johnson. Okay, thank you.
It's a wonderful book, and I think finally we all move away from home because we move away from childhood, and we move from finding whatever is going to sustain us within ourselves. And it takes some people longer than others, but I think that we are all exiles until we discover within ourselves, and for me, within relationship to God, what home really is.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Carol. Yeah, I think that was the goal of the professor, was to get us to a point where we were all like, oh, yeah, like we have these nuanced experiences. For me, it might be African diasporic or mixed race, whatever. Or for Aaron, it's the, your Ashkenazi Jewish identity, is it cultural or whatever. But ultimately, all of us are having a similar experience, right? And how powerful to realize that through line, despite the diversity of nuances. Yeah, and also a good segue to open up our minds to think about all of us who belong to this space and the folks who we bring with us. Maria, I'm going to pass it to you for this next part of who we're holding in warmth right now.
Okay, this is the list for this week. Lucy's dad, Joe, Elaine, Frank, Eloise, Athena, Adam, Kathleen, the Feldmans, and all the residents and visitors on Maui, Rob B., Randall M., Chris M., Patty and Caitlin, Sean and Deanne, Michael and Art, Gary Nelson, Charlene, the Dixon family, Shirley, and the people affected by wildfires in British Columbia and the Northwest Territories. And if there is another person in our community we can offer light and love to, please put their name in the chat and I will add them to the list in the clubhouse. And for the people who aren't named but who are in our thoughts, we send them light and love as well.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll just hold a moment together of silence. Breathe some love into those folks. Well, it feels good to not be alone, even when it feels lonely, especially when it feels lonely. But I love that reminder, Carol. Yes, that one does not necessarily mean the other. Just because you're alone doesn't mean you are lonely. So I'm glad that this is a space where we can be together and know faces and names and stories of folks who are walking the path with us, no matter where they are in the world. In full transparency, I'm surprised we got to 30 minutes on my scattered thoughts of diaspora. So I appreciate your generosity. I really wanted to bring back like a more thoughtful, put together thing, but I'm just processing so much on so many levels of my own being by getting back so soon. So yeah, I don't know if folks have other things to share. We can move into the post service time of conversations. I'm open saying yeah. So maybe folks who are holding other parts or breakout rooms afterwards, just a transparent facilitation moment. What feels right now? Yeah, please, Bruce, go for it.
You're muted, Bruce.
Yeah, so it's like, Carl Jung talked about individuation as like the ultimate goal of human self-identity, where it's easy to identify ourselves with a group, a gang or whatever, but that's just, that's kind of not where we want to go. We wanted to find what he calls our higher self. And the only way we can do that is through solitude. And that's my opinion that, the book of Exodus and many other stories in the Bible are metaphorical for the journey that we all have to go through to find, our real self, because our real self is not an identity based on our ego alone. It's a part of ourself that's much bigger. And so, I'm Scotch, Irish, German, Norwegian, whatever, but I don't want to identify with any particular group. I want to identify with the whole world. And so, I think, what you're talking about is really the core subject of what we're dealing with. So what you're talking about, if is really great stuff, and it's really huge. And so, so that's what I just have to say. I think we keep on talking.
Thank you, Bruce. And actually, you said some of my favorite words. I've been doing Jungian dream analysis for the last 5 years, and it's completely changed my life. And one of the things I noticed is that my dreams went from a very like domestic sense of who I am. So I was having lots of dreams of like either white folks or Black folks fighting me or accepting me or challenge. Like it was always, but there was always a very like clear distinction in my dream characters between white folks and Black folks. And then when I started my training as a priest, I was suddenly in Ghana. And now it's a different level of identity that's opened up. And so some of the work that we've been doing lately is about moving from a domestic identity to a global identity. And what does that mean? Like, who am I accountable to when all of a sudden, and this literally happened. I was dressed like this, I cover my hair every day now. I have some markings on my body that are hard to see on camera, but in Ghana, they mean certain things to people. They're like tribal marks. This is my first time there, and I was helping the group that we were with didn't understand some of the cultural stuff happening. So we get off of the bus at like the slave dungeon in Cape Coast, and the vendors are there and they're like, oh, what's your name? And Ghanaians are very friendly. If you ever go, it's almost so friendly, you don't believe it's authentic, but it is authentic. They're just very friendly, very helpful. And so they're asking people, what are your names? And this is a group of Afro-Latinx folks. So their names are not like Ghanaian names. They're like Vida and Norenia and so they're telling folks their names. We go through our tour, we come back to the bus, and they've put their names on these like seashells and whatever trinkets they're selling. And so now the expectation is that they make an offering for this, this item. And they're like, oh, well, we didn't have money at the time. It was a whole thing. They're like, the vendors are saying, oh, it's okay. It's okay. So folks are getting onto the bus with these items, and the vendors are at the door like, hey, where's Lorania? Like, I gave her this shell. She owes me some money. And so I'm shoveling things from the bus to the vendors and trying to explain like, oh, there's a cultural misunderstanding happening here. They didn't understand. And the vendor's like, oh, but look, they wrote her name like da da da. And at one point, there's 3 folks and there's a 4th behind. And the 4th person behind looks at me and says, oh, but she speaks Chi, which is the Ghanaian language. Why is she speaking to us in English? And so then all of a sudden I realized there was this dynamic where they thought there's this thing where diasporic Ghanaians can act like snobby and they don't speak English to other Ghanaians just to prove that they've got some elite global experience. And so now they really thought I was Ghanaian to the point that I'm snubbing them in this day. And so I had a real moment of like, oh, on some level, what it also says is that they accept me as Ghanaian, even though I've never been here before, right? So this is really, just to your point, Bruce, of like global identity. There's a book by Judith Butler, and I can't remember the name. When I think of it, I'll drop it in the chat. But it's basically a really dense way of talking about how the reason that we can know ourselves is because there's external affirmation of ourself, right? So when we're younger and we're developing, we need a family figure, a parent figure to affirm, like, yes, you are here. I do see you. It's part of how young people can do that. If you can't see me, I don't exist kind of thing, because there has to be a mutual recognition in order for the identity to become salient and stable. And so on this global sense, Bruce, to your point of like, to me, what it means too is that we have to have diverse experiences, right? We have to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations. We have to go on pilgrimage that maybe it's not to the right place, but we don't know that yet, just so that we continue to get information about how we're viewed, how we're accepted, how we're seen, and even how we're rejected, right? Like I've been on pilgrimage in Nepal. I'm not Nepalese, right? Like that's very obvious. And there's something about that being clear that told me a lot about myself and my Buddhist practice, right? At the time. And so, and even for us in this space, it's not, those things don't go away just because we have a sense of familiarity. there's still ways that we're able to learn about who we are based on how others perceive us. As people of faith, as people who are agnostic, as people wherever we are on the faith map. So thanks for offering that, Bruce. You pushed my buttons.
Carl Jung talks about how we have to go back and forth between ego being in the ego. The ego is not evil. It has its use. It's part of our survival, but we also don't want to get stuck in our ego. So we go back and forth. And sometimes being not stuck in our ego is painful because that we experience rejection. Or we don't feel at home because, well, our mind is getting bigger because of our experiences. So it's a back and forth thing. And so it's not like ego needs to be shunned, but we just need to become aware of it. So then when we realize we're in our ego, we can say, okay, I don't want to be in my ego anymore. I want to be in my higher self. So, I mean, we learn to do that by wandering through the wilderness.
And I think one of the things that come to my mind is like these little tools that Rabbi's always giving us. This one, something that you're not good at, is like such a great, subtle, simple way to chip away at that. So like to purposely do something that you know you're gonna suck at really helps to challenge that, right? It helps to challenge how you know yourself, how you relate to perfectionism and success, all sorts of things. So yeah, we've got tips and tricks. We're now at 1:15, clock reminder. What else is in the air before we are on as we make our descent to the timestamp?
Well, I'm listening to everybody. That what occurs to me is that my background, my source, I guess, is my parents both came from German lineage and so forth like that. But that when I dig deeper into that didn't always exist. And so that if we want to keep on going back and back and back and back, that is it possible that we're all from the same source? And that when we look at the beginning of humanity, that we are all part of that evolution. And so what we've come to do is in a sense, feel that we have to have an identity based on belonging to something. And that maybe what we need to be looking at is that we are all part of that oneness, and that we are all on a journey together based on our own life experiences and what we have to contribute to it. So that in my experience that I am white, okay, and that in going to some meetings and so forth like that I ended up being called the white supremacist. And so I don't have any identity with that, but so what I get at, I said, I am white, you can see that. I am a male, you can see that. What I have control over is how I respect and interact with you, and that this does not define me. It's just it's just the nature that I have, the physical being that I have.
Yeah, Bob, thank you for that. That's such a powerful concept. One of the things I think about a lot, which I don't hear in public discourse about those things, this is just a soft touch, not to turn us into this conversation because we only have 10 minutes left and it's worth much more than 10 minutes. But that this thing of being white supremacist, to me, it's such a powerful example that like you don't have to be white to act or be white supremacist. And like that's the beauty of the disease of racism, is that it doesn't need a white body to function properly. And I think that that's probably an example of other identity markers also, right? That like like to Rabbi's thing with Judaism, like you don't have to be born into it to be Jewish. Like there are ways that we can step into things and out of things. And the real task is being conscious about when we're wearing it. And that's what makes something like white supremacy so dangerous, is that we can wear it and not realize that we are. And so then we're acting inside of a silhouette that's very destructive without knowing that we're doing it. Yeah, Maria, I see your hand.
Actually, I just want to mention that Greg has his hand up.
Oh, so sorry. I didn't see you on the Zoom. Please. Yes, go for it.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on the idea of knowing yourself, because my life was such a mess. I had no idea who I was, what I was all about, until I had my mental illness collapse and started a whole rebuilding process after that. And that is where I started to understand who I was, where I came from, what affected me in life and my experiences, what I have to remove from my life, what I have to add to my life in order to make it what I feel I want to be. And once I did all of that, not that I've arrived at a ending point, never do. I just feel I can accept myself totally as I am. I know where I came from. I know the problems I had to deal with. I know what I have done. I know what I can do. And I will continue on until the day I leave this planet. And it's made a whole big difference in my life. And I think knowing yourself is, for me, a number one process that everybody should have.
Yes, thank you, Greg. You give me hope, because I feel like I'm just coming into a place where I can say that with as much solidness of voice as you just communicated. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you, Maria, for flagging Greg. I'm sorry I missed you. Yeah.
Okay.
Listen up.
Right. Well, this isn't the end. You all know that. I just want to do a quick pulse check. Were there announcements that were meant to be read before we closed the service portion of our time today?
Rabbi did not give me any announcements.
Okay, cool. So
We normally have our moment of silence, but I don't have the names.
Had it already.
yeah, I joined it with the prayers that Maria, that we can have more silence. I love sharing silence with people. That's my favorite thing. Oh, seeing the love in the chat. Thank you all so much. I appreciate getting to be experimental and real with you all. It's not a common theme in my life. There's lots of like professionalism and like performance, and I don't always do well in those spaces because I'm just not that into it. So I'm really appreciate being at a space like this with you all, where we have a common interest of love for and with one another. And I can just be like, I'm a mess and my brain is running 1,000,000 miles a minute and I'm thinking about diaspora. And you're like, cool.
Glad you were here. Thanks for leading us.
Very generous. My pleasure. It's my happiness.
We really appreciate you to come today, Afia. Thank you.
Yes.
So who's taking up next to help folks get to the right spots for?
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let's wave goodbye to the folks on that are watching this later, and I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.